to ask whatever questions. You can even heckle if you like.
Okay.
So first of all, I would like to thank Anu very much for inviting me to Chicago all those years ago. It was really quite a special trip for me, not least for being introduced to Barbara. And as you all know, Barbara, you are really quite unusual. And as you know, I mean that in the best possible way. You're really one of a kind. So I really appreciate all the kind of the enthusiasm and the sport, and also just lovely to meet the rest of this group. So thank you very much. What I'm going to talk about is a show that actually just came down just before the whole kind of COVID thing kicked off. And it was in Baroda Gallery Arc, and it was called Otherworldly Interiors. So the exhibition was in it's a kind of a private gallery, and I was invited to exhibit work that was really kind of, they were very open to whatever I had in mind. The gallery owners really knew my paintings, and they didn't know some of the other work I'd been involved with, but they were keen on me to exhibit that as well. So Otherworldly Interiors, it's a play. Most of you probably know of a magazine called The World of Interiors, which is it's what they call a shelter magazine. It's
gorgeous.
It's a lovely magazine. So Otherworldly Interiors was partly a play on that, trying to imagine the kind of environments that I would create. But it also kind of relates to the idea of our own interiors, which, you know, I've kind of been interested in various kind of somatic exercises. Actually, the picture I showed was of my grandfather doing yoga in the 1930s, and he was a Feldenkrais practitioner. So I remember as a child, him kind of practicing with me, or me practicing with him. And it kind of, I think it probably set my interest in, you know, what I later took up with Tai Chi and Qigong. And I'm quite interested in the way, you know, kind of when you go inward, that you kind of feel all sorts of things that are actually quite hard to describe. So anyway, Otherworldly Interiors was really a kind of a play on the idea of creating interiors that you can live in, but also ones that you would go within. I created a series of rooms. There were 3 rooms. This was really the entrance room. If you see on the right, you'll just see the text that I showed earlier on, and they were hand-carved letters that were painted. The central image is based on the idea of a pitch fire in the sense that it's on cloth. It's not a temple hanging. But it's one of the few cloth paintings that I've worked on over the years. Now I'll get into explaining a little bit about how I work and the people I work with. So this is and I'm just going to change the screen a little bit. So this is a hand-painted vintage photograph. You'll see about, I think, 3 or 4 faces that were part of the original photograph, and everything else around them has been painted on top of. So it's not a collage, it's literally been painted on top of, and their faces have been tinted. And this kind of gives a bit of an example of some of the work I do with Indian miniature painting, which is really kind of the center of my practice and has been for the last 25 years. I set up a studio in 1996 in Jaipur with this gentleman here. He's called Riazuddin. And we've been working together for, actually for 25 years. He's a master miniature painter. And I'd already, up to that point, when I left art college, I was very, very interested in working with craftspeople of very, very different skills and traditions. So I worked with knitters and embroiderers in Pakistan, the Afghan refugees. I worked with someone who made forgeries. And then in Delhi, I worked with shoemakers and spectacle repairers, embroiderers, sandcasters. And the idea, I was really kind of fascinated by different different skills, but also kind of finding ways of applying those skills to different applications. And you'll see some of those later. But over the years, Riaz has really become absolutely central to what I do. So this painting it's a mixture of kind of a number of very, very different traditions. The border is really from a medieval Western manuscript painting. And then the figures, as far as they relate to Indian miniature paintings, refer to very, very different traditions. So there's the figure on the right, on the bottom right, is from a Turkish miniature painting. The lady on the left smoking her hookah pipe relates actually to a company school painting. There's a Rajput figure on the left. And within all this, and there's a figure from southern India, the character riding on the oxen that's painted in the colors of, well, with a pattern of a tiger, of a zebra, but slightly different colors. So what you see is really a kind of an amalgamation of very, very different traditions, very different skills and so on. And the way it works with Riaz is that I essentially conceive and design the painting. So all the placements and the color and the kind of the narratives come at my end. And for Riaz, his focus is really on painting it with the most kind of detail that he possibly can. And he's really the best miniature painter certainly living, that I've ever seen. Excuse me. So a painting like this would start in my studio, where I'm kind of mapping all the figures out. So I might be, the dodo is based on the center left. There's a dodo also in the same colors as that last creature. So I'm finding images from all sorts of different sources, and then I'm kind of putting them together, changing the colors, changing the patterns. And then that document goes back to Riaz, and he will start to paint it according to kind of very specific instructions. So for Riaz, he doesn't really want to think about where to put things, what colors there should be. His energy is really focused on painting. And as I say, he's remarkably gifted as a painter. And then after a number of months, the painting will come back to me, and then I might add the fish on the right, or I think the ladies in their burqas on the bicycles came later, and then it would go back to Riaz. And it really goes back and forth. This painting actually, I think it probably went on for about 4 years, and it was even exhibited at one point before a number of the elements were added. So I think of these as kind of like love letters between Riaz and myself. I go to India once, sometimes twice a year, and we'll work together in the studio then. But otherwise, things are just going back and forth, as I say. Can I just ask, can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. All right. And again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate.
Alexander,
Yes.
when you say the work goes back and forth, are you talking physically, the paintings, or do you do some of it electronically?
No, they go back and forth physically. We use this career company. They know us very well by now, and it's literally the work. When I met Riaz, I don't think I've got pictures of him from 25 years ago, the studio. He was working in a very, very small studio in the Muslim neighborhood of the old city in Jaipur. And at that time, I think it was him and one other person working together. And over the years, as this project has grown and I've kind of exhibited more widely, there are now 6, 7, sometimes 8 or 9 artists working together. So it's what they call a karkhana, which is it's the Urdu word for a workshop. So in this piece, for example, I think there are probably about 4 people were involved in this particular piece, apart from myself. One person would be blocking in the colors, someone else might be doing the small borders. Someone else who's very good at painting foliage did the artichoke, and Riaz would really work on the most kind of the infinitesimal details. But the work itself does go back and forth physically.
Alex, are these in oil or watercolor or?
They're all water-based pigments. We generally use traditional stone colors or plant pigments that are soluble in water. So they're ground down. So it could be, let's say it's malachite, or it could be lapis lazuli, or it could be sindoor, the orange color that's used on the forehead. And it's ground down, so it's very, very fine. And then that's mixed with gum arabic, which is a binder, and then water. And then they're put in shells, in mussel shells, and then mixed in the fingers. So these are all, they are all water-based.
Alex?
I just sent you a picture of him in his studio.
Alex, in the previous picture, the one with the dodo, I assume that's the dodo from Mansoor. So do you pick famous old Indian painters that you hide in your current paintings? Is that something?
It's a mixture, actually. You know, they really could be from a very, very wide range of sources. The lady on the right is from a Renaissance painting. And then I might change the head or the colors of the outfits or change the pattern. So there are some parts from quite well-known Indian miniature paintings, but I'm very, what's the word, Catholic? Very, probably iconoclastic's a good word.
Yes.
I do try not to offend religious sensibilities, and you know, sometimes I make errors. I've kind of designed images with Ganesh on a bicycle, which seems fine, but then he was too close to some footwear, and one of the artists in the studio got upset. So it was really an error on my part. So I kind of changed that imagery. So the work comes from all sorts of different sources. Yeah.
What's the approximate size of these?
Well, they're probably about 12 inches by 15 inches. Some are smaller, some are larger. Historically, Indian miniature paintings they're not called miniatures because they're necessarily small. They're called miniatures because of the brushwork. So you do get some quite large ones, but historically they were meant to be handheld rather than on the wall. So that kind of suggests a certain kind of intimacy. And as you'll see in this one, there's kind of really a window within a window. And that device was quite common in Indian, actually, I'll just go back, in Indian miniature paintings. And it kind of creates this idea that you're really peering in. Again, otherworldly interiors. It's also a reference to the act of looking at a miniature painting. Some of the work is absolutely figurative and, you know, based on storytelling, and some is completely abstract. I actually don't differentiate too much between abstraction and figurative work because I think they're both very much connected. So this was...
Alexander, can you blow this up so people can see the detailing in it? It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, you know, I can't do that on the...
All right, we'll do it later.
Yeah, I can't exactly. I'll be able to kind of highlight individual images, but
okay.
you know, I think what I'll do is I'll move forward a few images because there is a little video. I hope this okay. So this is just about a minute long.
Perfect.
So this is all painted with the natural eye and not with a looking glass?
Absolutely, absolutely, with a single head brush.
Wow. Extraordinary.
So there you'll see the brush with a single hair, or it's tipped in a single hair. Right. So in this piece, you'll see he uses the same brush, and it's essentially a brush. It's got a body of hairs, and then the last one that protrudes is one single hair. So Riaz can paint the lines of the eyelids or the fingernails, and it's really kind of astonishing work. And there's another artist called Papu in the studio. Well, his name is not Papu in the studio, it's just Papu. And no, he is in the studio quite often. And he painted this without a ruler. And it's just mind-boggling to watch him paint. So he'll do all the horizontal lines and then the diagonal lines and so on until it builds up. It's a bit blurry. Some of the images are based on kind of early tantric drawings. Hindu tantric drawings are quite different from the Tibetan, so they're kind of aniconic. And they often relate to kind of seed images or atoms. And again, so this actually relates to a kind of cosmological drawing with the seeds in the center. But then on top of that, it's been added this very, very fine leaf pattern. Oops. So my work with miniature paintings has partly been related to kind of, not exactly subverting the tradition, but giving it a bit of a twist. Riaz and 99.5% of the other painters in Jaipur, and there are about anywhere between 3,000 and 5,000 painters in Jaipur. Their work is basically to do with copying, basically making copies of copies of copies for the tourist market. So the tourist market's basically been sustaining the tradition for decades. But the paradox is it also keeps it really stuck because none of the artists have any incentive to develop new imagery or to invent because they don't know that they would have a market for it. So they make these beautiful copies, but they're rather kind of, as I say, they're a bit static. So my role in this is basically to come into it, just to kind of add new iconography and kind of change the color patterns and so on. But the other part of the project has really been to do with taking miniature painting outside of the picture plane. So over the years, I've been kind of developing wallpapers and carpets, fabrics and so on. So this was an installation I did a number of years ago. This is another one. That's I have a certain kind of connection to goats wearing sweaters. But again, I think Barbara knows something about. So this is actually a goat that's been cast in aluminium and has a sweater on it. That's when the carpets, again, actually related quite strongly to a certain kind of tantric drawings that I've been really fascinated by. But then the blue and purple pattern is relates partially to durries, the flat woven carpet, the flat woven rugs that are woven in Indian prisons, but also to the lining of kaftans. So Jack,
Louder, Barbara.
No, it was Jack.
Jack.
So how large a piece is that?
This is about, I think it's 6 feet by 9 feet.
Okay, and the warp and weft is what, cotton, and the pile is wool?
The whole thing is wool. It's basically kind of a hand tufted wool. I work with a wonderful company in Jaipur called Jaipur Rugs, and
again, is it tufted or knotted?
This one's tufted. Yeah, I have done both, but this one is a hand tufted rug.
Okay.
This was another exhibition I did. This was probably the first one that really kind of brought together. I thought of this as bringing the organ back into the organic. So there are quite a lot of, let's say, biomorphic forms. And so you'll see that the carpet kind of reflects the, you know, is kind of similar to the wallpaper design, and the wallpaper design will appear in one or two of the paintings. But then there are actually kind of objects as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about the objects later on.
One more question
Yes.
about the carpets. The dyes used are natural or synthetic?
You know, it depends. They use a mixture of both. I mean, it partly depends on, you know, it kind of depends on the application. I think for these ones, they're mainly synthetic. But we have done ones with natural dyes as well. Yeah.
Are these one of a kind, or do you produce them?
These are one of a kind. I mean, I've, you know, in a way, I'm kind of very lucky that it's designing, well, yeah, I really like changing things up. I'd probably be smarter to do series of the same things, but I'm kind of quite excited by trying different things out. So there are a few designs that I've done in slightly different colors. But yeah, these are one of a kind. So now we're back to the to otherworldly interiors, and this is the third room. And they'd asked me to make a dining table that was, again, based on one of the kind designs that we had thought would actually be used. And in the end, we decided not to, you know, that would really complicate things. So the chairs were ones that we bought in the market and then were hand painted and reupholstered using my design. So in each of these, for example, I've essentially, I've designed the chairs themselves, and there are better pictures later on of the chairs. And that's another view of it. So the plates were all hand painted, and then the napkins were digitally printed. That's the carpet just there. This is one of the chairs, so I'm just going to show you all the chairs. So on the chair seat, you see the same pattern that was on the wallpaper in a different color scheme. It's my flying elephant chair.
Oh,
And then I have just been designing some lamps as well. So again, the lampshade is hand painted, as is the base. And again, the way this will work is that I'll draw out the patterns on either directly onto the object or onto paper, and then design it that way. And the color scheme's being set out. So the artists in the studio are kind of working to some pretty clear instructions, but things always come out looking a little bit different, which I like. This is one of the one of the plates.
Looks like my family.
Then we must be related.
That would be nice.
Again, so these monsters are based on my drawings of, you know, kind of how I imagine the early Vikings to have looked.
Alexander, could you momentarily show the picture with the chairs at the table again?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, the next, the one sitting there, that one.
This one. Yeah.
Thank you.
The rug is spectacular.
Yes.
Thank you.
It all is.
Thank you. So these are 4 of the plates, and then there were 2 plates hanging up. And again, they're all hand painted.
Thank you.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
This is
great.
Thank you. So I don't think this offended anyone, and it certainly was not intended to. But I just kind of like the idea of ladies in their burqas being able to kind of go out on their kind of chopper bikes and their bicycles. So again, each one of these patterns, this is actually real gold that's been applied and then each of the patterns is derived from a different Mogul miniature painting, or it's one that I've adapted from another source.
Oh, that's great.
That is great.
An elephant for all seasons.
So, well, is it an elephant, or is it a parrot, or is it a tiger, or is it a... it's interesting. We often kind of privilege the form before we privilege for the patterns, but yes, it is. It's an elephant with an identity crisis.
But a colorful one. Alexander, are these manufactured at all?
No, you know, one of the things that I would like to do eventually is to go into kind of small scale production. And in fact, I've just found some of the napkins that I designed for another company were turned into face masks, which I'm quite delighted about because they had excess material. So I have, I have designed a swatch watch in the past.
I've got that.
Oh, have you?
Mm.
Oh, good. So yeah, I've done a swatch and I've done some tableware, but this one is hand painted, so it's not exactly dishwasher safe.
It reminds me of Barbara's description of green penis syndrome. This elephant clearly has green ear syndrome.
Right.
And is also celebrating great gay pride month.
Yes,
that's
Yes,
right.
definitely.
That's right. This was a cup, just a regular teacup that was painted. One of the artists that we work with who's not actually in the studio, he's kind of outside. He's an astonishing painter of tigers. But again, I would say that the tigers, you know, after a while, they get a little bit uneventful, I would say. So the idea was really to apply the same technique to, you know, to objects. And this is a kind of a clay lassie cup that's been painted with a flying elephant and some floating lotus leaves. This I have no idea.
It's interesting.
Yeah, you know, some of the imagery just, I'm very lucky, I suppose, because I don't literally have to paint this. So I've got the freedom to dream and to just to mess around.
Yeah.
And actually Barbara and I were saying, because we were talking about humor and how humor can be quite a serious thing. And I definitely think the same about play. You know, if you watch children playing, it's a very serious thing. You know, they
It's
take
hard
their play
work.
very seriously. Yeah, it's work, and it's just this degree of engagement that it's almost like an effortless concentration. And I think it's a kind of form of absorption. So I'm very lucky that I'm able to kind of be able to draw things, and I draw a lot. I spend a lot of my time drawing. So sometimes the imagery comes out, and at the end of it, I'll think, what the hell is this? So that's one of those. That's one of those. Whereas this one's completely obvious. So this is your bog standard bread knife that's been painted with a Mogul pattern. Again, Papu painted the blade itself, and again, it's all freehand. And this is real gold applied to white paint.
Oh,
That's wonderful.
I want a set of the ones on the right.
All right. Be careful what you wish for,
You
Barbara.
can't wash them though.
And this is another gay pride.
Alexander,
food. Yes.
what kind of paint do you use for the flatware?
This is actually, we often use the same paint. So, and then we put some matte varnish over it. Sometimes if we're working on something that's very smooth, actually, and I think the case with the metal, we'll put some acrylic paint on first, and it just has a certain kind of, it can grip. It adheres to the silver, and then we might paint the stone color on top of that, matte varnish.
But none of these are useful, right?
That's
Usable.
Nothing I do is useful. I make a point of being absolutely useless. Actually, this is useful. This is a light.
Lamp,
Yes.
Who doesn't need lamps? But it is about the most useless lamp you could use, and I've got the lowest wattage bulbs, I guess, so it barely emits any light at all. But yeah, so this was really, you know, thinking of cactus plants, and so this is made out of fiberglass. That again has been hand painted. Right, where are we? I'm going to push forward just a little bit. Right, so when I started working with artisans about 25 years ago, this was before I met Riaz, I worked first of all with or quite early on with a spectacle repairman. And he constructed I think he did the monocle, the one in the middle, and then the six-eyed spectacle, and then the three-eyed one, basically adapting bits that he already had in his workshop. So this was the thing that really got me interested in kind of different techniques and the kind of how people organize their workspace, which I always find fascinating. The man who made these worked in a space that was about 5 foot by 5 feet. And everything was near to hand. It was really kind of remarkable to watch. I did actually make a short film with a friend about some of the artisans I've worked with. It's a kind of non-narrated documentary that we intended to do properly and kind of ran out of whatever it was, just didn't finish it, but I'll send you the link to that. And then this was something I did with a tailor. I kind of had this idea of Shiva going up for an interview, for kind of an interview for some kind of corporate job. And this is actually it's only about 8 inches tall. It's very small, but it's a 6-arm suit for Shiva. So this was really kind of some of the people I was working with before I met Riaz. So this, yeah. So we'll see some of the details of these later, but this is a set of hammers.
Wonderful.
Beautiful.
So these are just regular hammers.
Hammers, yeah.
They're actually a little bit, it's funny, I had a show here in New York, and some people came in, and one of them was a carpenter, and he almost didn't notice the painting, but he was really amazed by the shape of the hammer itself, which I thought was interesting. And this is another one. So Indian hammer are slightly different.
Beautiful.
You may know the Edward Lear, who wrote limericks. I don't know if you're all familiar with him. So he was also a very, very gifted ornithological painter, and he used to paint parrots in Kew Gardens. So there's a book of the parrots and parakeets from around the world that he painted. So I've basically used Edward Lear's paintings of parrots and parakeets as color schemes for the different objects that I've painted. So I kind of like this idea of something coming from, maybe originally from Africa, being interpreted by Edward Lear. And that was a source for me in terms of the colors that was then applied to an Indian hammer and painted in a workshop that Raz and I have had for the last 25 years. So in a way, the backstory has become kind of, in some respects, more interesting or more useful. No, not more useful, but more interesting than the work itself.
Alexander,
yes.
if you like Edward Lear, some of his drawings of owls are in the halls of the National History Museum in Chicago.
Oh, wonderful. All right.
Next time you're here, try
I'd love to see those, yes. Yeah. So this figure, you're probably all aware of these anatomical figures. And again, I was thinking of kind of going into a life class, and there was kind of a goddess with 4 arms and 4 legs. So this was really a kind of an anatomical figure, and it's been constructed. It was actually, each of the parts was digitally printed and then stuck together. So these were some of the figures that inhabited the gallery. In other words, so underworldly interiors also kind of presuppose otherworldly figures to inhabit. This is another of those anatomical figures that's been hand painted with. It's almost like a lexicography of different patterns. This was a marble kotuk. It's actually based.
You clearly have no hang-ups.
It's based on the acorn design that was actually the one that's used in schools throughout America, and I found one in an old studio that I used to work in the East Village, and then it's been enlarged in marble. This is like a pink marble, so it's about 18 inches, and it starts looking quite different when you enlarge it. So I have a few of these made.
Just like real life.
Just like real life, exactly. This was someone I started to work with recently. It's actually a tin beater. Well, this is actually made from silver, and it was a car that would carved in the studio and then decided to coat it in metal. So it's basically like a.
How big is that, Alexander?
This is probably about 8 inches long. It's fairly small. I once saw a photograph of a phone that had been melted, unfortunately, in a house fire, and it really had quite a strong impact on me. So I bought these old phones in the market and then had them cast, first melted them and then had them cast. So it's, again, absolutely useless. Globe. One of the people I work with in Jaipur is a woodcarver. So this is an object. Again, it's probably about 6 by 6 by 6. It's quite small, handheld.
It looks like a Linda Banglis.
Sorry?
It looks like a Linda Banglis. You know who
yes,
she is?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm really a kind of, I suppose I just absorb images from so many different sources, and actually sometimes hard for me to know where anything comes from.
Well, that's true with all of us, I think.
Say that again?
I think that's true with all of us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I don't actually really believe in the idea of originality.
I don't.
Yeah,
I think this also reminds me of Ken Price.
Oh, I love Ken Price. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's lovely to be reminded of both of them.
You're in good company, wherever it is.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I really think of things in terms of connections rather than originality, and I think it's an odd feature of essentially kind of Western art.
What's the finish on that?
It's got a satin gloss, so it's got a bit of a shine, and it is kind of, the idea was for it to look like it was ceramic, but it's hand painted wood.
It's really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I've done a few of these in different. Some of them are black and gold, and then some are black and I'm working on some that are black and red. But the idea really is that it just, this idea of originality is something that we're often kind of quite hung up on. And I think of nothing as original, but if I'm lucky, it connects 2 or 3 or 4 other pre-existing traditions. Character.
Who's finishing on your work?
Sorry?
Who does the finishing on your work?
Well, that's done in, either I do or it's done in the studio in Jaipur. So this one will be kind of just sprayed before, because obviously they're quite delicate. But this is an object that I drew that was carved by the wood carver, and then it was coated in gold leaf, and then hand painted.
Quite elegant.
Thank you. And then those are not real emeralds. But don't tell anyone. This is my book of napkins. So you'll see on the table from earlier on, there are a whole bunch of napkins.
Betty, you and I can
And,
do the placemats.
I'd
And-
like them as napkins. I use cloth napkins for everything.
So do I.
Betty and I bought pillow covers in India and used them as placemats.
Placemats.
Mm-hmm.
Those Rajasthani quilt placemats.
That's right. Yeah. So I made a book. So these are actually padded. So they're, in case you can need to bang your head against something, you could actually bang your head against these, and you won't do any damage. So this was really a book of napkins. I don't have any of the other pictures in this, but I can show you some. Goodness knows what this is. But we did find a collection of glass eyes. And what I realized actually was that glass eyes are never made in pairs.
Right, because each eye is unique.
Well, no one really needs to put in two fake eyes that are the same.
Well, that's true.
That was brilliant.
Good point.
So yeah, no two glass. Oh, yeah, well, anyway, this is what you'd call an outlier. It's based on the same, the idea of the coat hooks, and then I started kind of making them in clay and then twisting them. So some of them are completely useless. But I think every show I do has one thing that just doesn't make sense to me at all, and this is it. Whereas this is completely sensible. I used to kind of go to, in the days of travel agents, you'd go to travel agents and they often had one of these plastic planes on the desk, with kind of Qantas Air or what have you. And I kind of always liked the idea of making an airplane that didn't look entirely trustworthy. So this was a kind of derivation of that. It's actually made in, it's cast brass that's been hand painted, and then, oh no, actually no, this one was wood. We did do some in brass, but this one was wood and then set with some very precious stones.
A cheerleader.
Oh, what?
A cheerleader.
A cheerleader.
I would have said a geisha.
It looks to me like an abstraction of a Chinese Tang dancer with the large sleeves and the rectangular dress. Now the mushrooms are a different story, but I'm not going to.
A very slow-moving geisha.
A hallucinating one.
Yeah. Well, I really like the idea, and this is true of the paintings as well. I mean, we'll get to some of the paintings. The idea that no one will read a piece in the same way. So it's what I do, I think, is kind of non-didactic. It's often there's an idea that there is a story to be told, but that story is really up to the viewer. So I think of the viewer as the meaning maker. And once I'm finished with the work, it just goes out there. And so there is no such thing as misinterpreting anything that's ever done, including this.
The designs are marvelous.
Sorry?
The designs are marvelous.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's, this is again a kind of a lexicon of different patterns. I like the idea of the Eskimo maps that were made of strings and knots, and you get the sense that you would hold this and it would tell you something about the world around you. And then the pathway was based on, I saw a drawing. When I was younger, I traveled in Tibet, and meeting a young monk who had a book with a map, and there was a red line that went through every single page. And it was probably kind of an analogy of kind of one's route through life. But that image has kind of appeared in quite a lot of the drawings, either as a kind of a river or a stream or a pathway. And it appears in a lot of different drawings. Some kind of totem.
Eyes have it.
Sorry?
The eyes have it.
The eyes have it. This is,
Oh, I love that.
this is what I thought of as a lobster.
It's wonderful.
The bird.
The family.
There's a family, exactly. In the exhibition, these were actually all mounted on very slowly revolving motors. So they were on a shelf, and each one was revolving.
Oh, terrific.
I don't have a video of that for some reason. I need to get that. But again, these are my kind of the Mogul Vikings. All of which, and with English dentistry. Oh, there's me.
Fascinating.
Yeah, that design was called City Lights, and it started off as a painting that was then applied to some clothing, and then lastly to this grandfather chair.
This gives new meaning to the concept of camouflage.
Exactly, exactly. Just be careful not to sit on him.
Yeah.
We painted shoes for the first time.
Oh, wow. Those are great.
And
Oh,
Amazing.
so,
Alexander, do you know the work of the Chicago post-World War II artist called the Harry Who?
oh, I do, yes, yeah.
This has a very Harry Who feel to it.
Yes, there are a number of these Chicago imagists.
Right.
Barbara Rossi is someone
Well, Barbara
adore.
Rossi has a great connection to India.
She does, yeah. And
I know
just,
her.
Oh,
Yeah.
you do?
Yeah, I know her from the Art Institute. She was
Right.
a longtime professor there, and we collaborated on a project once.
Oh, wow. Yeah, she sounds like a really wonderful woman. And actually, the book she produced about vernacular Indian art is
That was
really
a great show. It was at the Smart Gallery in Chicago years ago in the 90s.
It's a masterful book.
Yeah,
I
it's
love
a great resource.
Yeah.
and
So,
these look like
But this has more of a Gladys Nelson, Jim Nutt feel to it.
right. Yeah. You know, the world of interiors. I think we all have one of these lurking within us. So this was actually, I think what happens for me is that if I'm invited to do an exhibition, it just sets up a whole range of problems, I guess. I think artists create problems for themselves and hopefully find graceful solutions to them. So once I'd been asked to do this table, it just set off a whole range of possibilities. And so we were collecting pots from the local pot sellers in the old city. So this is really an earthenware pot that's been sealed and then again hand painted and then sprayed. So I kind of liked the idea that it was very, very kind of low tech, but also with this kind of high level finish. Oh, that's the other one.
Ooh, I'd wear those.
You would. Yeah.
Oh,
Right, so this is back to the Renaissance.
Napoleon's sister.
Yeah, this is.
God.
Sorry?
Napoleon's sister from Villa Borghese.
Yeah, that's right. So this is kind of, again, a mixture between different schools of painting. There's a kind of the center part is based on some Nadwara paintings. The surround part, around the oval, is based on a design. I was asked to do some packaging years and years ago, when this project started with Riaz, the way it really worked was that I got kind of commissioned to do some packaging for Crabtree and Evelyn. And I think once I'd asked Riaz if he would be willing to work with me, it only, ultimately it's kind of an economic relationship too. That's how it started, and actually still exists in that way. But because we got these commissions and they were well paid for me and therefore for him, he became quite interested in doing it, understandably. He's a very practical guy. But this was one of the first things, was that we applied it to packaging. And so that pattern was a pattern we did for some kind of, it was a wallpaper, it was kind of based on a Victorian wallpaper. And then the pattern would just kind of take different forms throughout with different paintings. So this again is an amalgamation of very, very different paintings. The oval is reminiscent of a Pahari painting. And then the giraffes are just giraffes, having fun.
Unbelievable.
So again, this is really the idea of looking down. I was thinking of these plans, of building plans, kind of room layouts. But again, the colored lines are redolent of many, many Indian miniature paintings.
It'd be a gorgeous rug.
Yes, actually, I haven't done a rug based on this yet, but I think a lot of the time I'm looking at traditional miniature paintings, and often if you look around the edge or the part that's not kind of the main focal point, for me is often where the meat is. And that's certainly the case with the outlines of traditional miniature paintings. I find them just really beautiful. And then the blues, it's different shades of lapis or other, or Neil blue. And we use gouache colors to tint the stone colors to get more variation. Oh, they're there again.
Alexander, what does the fish symbolize? A fish appears in many of your miniatures.
It does, and again, it's really not a fixed thing. I mean, often they're just,
This painting needs a fish.
Oh, this one actually has a fish towards the top right.
No, but I mean, some of mine have fish.
Oh, I see. Right. I kind of play around with the elements quite a lot. I'm kind of quite interested in the way the 5 elements interact with each other. So often you'll have the water, you'll have a fish floating, in the sky, or you'll have a bird way underground, and so it's kind of really playing around with the center of attention here. I mean, the idea is that it really moves around, but it's kind of often landscapes within landscapes. So you look through a window and you'll see the night sky, and then another window has daylight coming through it. So the animals, they interact with each other, and they take on colors from other animals and so on. So the camel here is dressed as a cheetah, and all of which is to say, Barbara, that I have no idea what the fish symbolizes.
Oh,
that's the short answer.
Okay.
I just want to jump in here for a minute, but the fish shows up in a lot of sort of ontological scrolls of the various avatars of Vishnu. And you'll see the fish at the bottom as sort of the avatars of Vishnu almost represent the zoological ontology of species. So the fish is always at the bottom, and then there's a tortoise, and then there's something a little more developed along the way. So the Art Institute has a great scroll. We used it on the cover of the book we did called Holy Cow. Holy Cow and Other Animals from 02.
And was there a catalog for that?
Yeah, it was a catalog that I did with Pratap Pal in '02.
Oh, wonderful.
It's available. Holy Cow and Other Animals.
You will be seeing images from that appearing in my paintings within the next 8
I think you
months or
can get
so.
it pretty cheap on Amazon now because it's probably out of print by now, but I think it's available.
Okay, great.
Enjoy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm quite a kind of voracious. You know, I just take images, and in a way, there's something a little bit. I won't say probably whimsical. I was going to say superficial, but heaven forbid.
No, whimsical.
Whimsical, thank you. But there is, you know, it's kind of playing fast and loose a little bit with symbolism. But I do think these things are open. So this is back to Riaz. We're coming to the end of the talk. So I was telling my wife yesterday, Joy, that I absolutely love this man. We've known each other for, I think, 25 years now. And every time I see him, I just, you know, part of me just gets so, I feel kind of incredibly lucky. And in fact, I think all the last photos you're going to see are really about kind of the part of this whole, all of this work that is really, really kind of important for me. It's really, you know, the social side and the interaction. And I think it plays into what this salon is about, which is kind of the humanness, you know, just about people connecting and people sharing. And it even actually, you know, to bring in something very current, I was thinking about the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. That one of the things that that we're often talking about assets, you know, and kind of the apportioning assets, and but the asset of connection and relationship, you know, and networks is so kind of critical for all of us, and I think we feel it more when we're more isolated. So I feel like incredibly fortunate to have this series of relationships with these people, with Riaz and his family, which is actually quite an extensive family. He lives in a house with 4 of the brothers live together, so it's really kind of an extended family, and they're not always in such good humor, I have to say that, but they
Is any family.
Is any family, but it's really kind of incredible just to be able to, you know, to be with people. I mean, Riaz actually is, you know, doing, you know, he does very well now, and I feel kind of very proud in a sense with the studio that it's now supporting really 4 or 5 families, only Riaz's family, and you know, Riaz would do perfectly well without me. That's you know, he could, but I feel very proud that I've been a part of his, you know, kind of how his family has kind of developed over the years, and some of the artists as well, you know, that are in the studio, and that's really become a kind of really kind of major part of the whole project. So this is, I like to think of them as my children. Yes, I think that is it.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Bravo. Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So I'm going to stop the share now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alexander.
Wow.
So, Alexander, did Riaz learn his craft through a lineage of being in a painterly family?
He learned from his father, but his father was essentially self-taught. His father was an antique dealer, and he was really more, you know, he would travel around Rajasthan and other states finding things. And he was, I think they were the family lineage. They were actually shield makers. Not many of us can say that, but they were shield makers for the royal for the royal family, and they originated in Lahore. Obviously, it's a Muslim family, and his father became an antiques dealer and got into collecting and dealing with paintings, and not all of it was completely above board. They found some astonishing ways of tricking people, very creative ways of, and the stories are just, I'm in the studio, and Riaz loves to tell stories, and I love to listen, and I'm often kind of aghast at the kind of things they have got up to. But his brother is also an antiques dealer, and they find the most astonishing objects. So the father actually was kind of decided to copy some of the paintings in his collection in order to learn how to do it. And to learn means in order to make copies, some which were kind of fed into the bazaar. And he actually trained an artist called Banu, who is fairly well known.
That artist's name?
Banu. So
I
Banu,
met him once.
yeah,
I met him.
right. So Banu was a artist who actually became quite prominent and got to know. I think he got to know Jackie Onassis, and he got to know Stuart Carey Welch, who was one of the kind of main scholars. Worked with Banu on a book. And Banu actually was taught by Riaz's father, and then they had a falling out, which again is quite common because everyone's just doing their own thing. But so again, that's a long answer to your question. That
So
it's actually one of the
Alexander,
half generations. Yes,
I think the artist of my Pichwai is Banu.
It could be that could be because Banu's son Shaheen has opened up his own Pichwai studio.
Yeah,
So
I think that's the same family because I have a work from his son as well.
Right. Okay, so that could be. And Banu actually developed his own style that was kind of similar to kind of Kishingar painting, which is one particular school of Rajasthani miniature painting, with very kind of large opalescent eyes.
Fish-eyed ladies.
Yes, that's right, but his paintings are quite washy, rather than they weren't opaque as a lot of Indian miniature paintings.
The Art Institute has a couple of Kishingar paintings.
Right.
One's probably a copy, but one I think is an original.
Mm-hmm.
Alexander, the works that you showed today, are any of them available?
Yes, all those works are actually still with the gallery in Baroda, and they did pretty well with the show, considering it's kind of a fairly new gallery. But they still have works there.
Can you send us a link?
I definitely will. I'll introduce you to Nupur at the gallery.
Do you have a website yourself?
I have a theoretical website. And it's in my mind, it's absolutely brilliant.
Yes.
I've been, honestly, I do have one, and it's rubbish. I've been meaning to work on it, and I just never get around to it. I kind of run out of time. I'm really a plate spinner, trying to keep all sorts of things going at the same time. But I will eventually get my website going. But
So you only have one dealer?
no, I have a few. I mean, I work with this gallery in Baroda, and then I work with a gallery in Aspen, the Baldwin Gallery, and in San Francisco I work with Berggruen.
I didn't realize you were with Berggruen.
Oh right, yeah, I had a show about a year and a half ago.
But you take direct commissions?
I have been known to take direct commissions. I mean, when I'm not working with, because I'm not working with a gallery in New York, I do. I've been invited by certain people, such as Barbara, to work on commission. So you know, and I'm actually working on a museum show. There's a museum that's opening in Bangalore, hopefully next year. And I'm doing an exhibition based on their photographs from their collection that I'm going to be painting on top
Is it
of.
Abhishek Photo Art Gallery?
It certainly is.
Fantastic. I've given some really good stuff from my collection to them.
Oh, have you? Wonderful. Yeah, I went to visit them about this time last year, and it's going to be a remarkable museum, and he's very persuasive. So,
isn't he though?
Sorry?
The charming man.
Yes, he is, and it's a really good group of people. So
when Madhu led a trip from the Art Institute, we visited his home.
Oh,
The house is so wonderful.
And then he came to Chicago, was it 2 years ago? When Dayanita Singh was here?
Yeah.
And yeah, he was, because Anu, do you remember?
Yes, we, Barbara, Abhishek and I went out to dinner outside, wasn't it, Barbara? At Shanghai?
Yeah, at the peninsula.
Yeah.
So yeah, so they've got a very good collection of photography, and that was really the idea behind the show, would be to use photographs from their collection that will either be shown alongside the ones that have been kind of doctored and by me, and that should be in about a year's time. So that's
We're all going.
Oh, great!
Oh, yes, we were planning to go this year.
Well, I'd love to have a group of people come to visit the studio in Jaipur, because the neighborhood.
Oh, it's wonderful. Tell about the goats and sweaters.
Well, maybe that's maybe another time I'll present a little bit about the neighborhood in Jaipur and the goats and sweaters, but because
oh, sorry, go finish.
Well, just say the neighborhood that Riaz is in it's a Muslim neighborhood. I mean, it's pretty rough and ready, I have to say. It's not there's the Muslim neighborhoods generally are not nearly as well kept as the Hindu neighborhoods, and that's really kind of by design. There's a lot of politics at play, so it's kind of but it's fascinating. I mean, I spend quite a lot of time on the back of Riaz's bike, and we go all over the place, and he knows it so well. It's astonishing, and he'll take, if I need, I've worked with some sari embroiderers who've embroidered napkins for me in the past, and we just go hunting, we just go looking for people, and you'll just go down one road and you look into each doorway and there's some other kind of cottage industry, and there's this incredible resourcefulness of people who just find ways of doing things. And so Riaz's neighborhood is right next to the gold beaters. And there are probably about 2,000 to 3,000 people who beat gold leaf.
Oh my!
And it's just an incredible thing. So before you see them, you hear them, and it's an incredibly kind of rhythmic sound from a distance. And they're kind of really making music, and that's one of the ways they keep going. Excuse me. So sometimes it'll be one or two people alone in a room. Sometimes it's a group of people, all men, and they're just kind of pounding away at these books of gold, making gold leaf that goes onto candies, or is used for gold leafing, building, rooms, or it's made into paint for the miniature painters.
Alexander, do you by any chance know the work of Arun Sharma in Udaipur?
Arun Sharma, I know Ajay Sharma, but I don't know Arun.
I know Ajay Sharma.
Yeah.
not Arun Sharma.
Yeah, I don't know Arun. No, I don't know Arun Sharma.
I'll send you something. This is work. I think you'd really enjoy his work.
Oh, great! Thank you.
It's miniature painting, but large and very playful. It's some very, very interesting things.
Oh, great! Yeah, I mean, I think there are, in Udaipur and Jaipur, I think, are really the centers now of miniature painters. And there are artists in Bikaner and Kishangarh and a few other places, but the markets are most kind of business markets are in Jaipur and Udaipur.
He's a very persuasive salesman. I thought I was just going to buy one small little piece, and you know.
Well,
Merle, you wanted to pop in there?
Oh, I'm wondering, what time of year do you go to Jaipur?
well, for the last few years, I've been going in January, February. Sometimes I'll go in November as well. I mean, I try, since the kids were born, I try and go once a year. But we actually, when they were 4, we spent 6 months in India, kind of living and traveling around India, and it was a really.
Can I come with you?
Sorry?
Can I come with you?
Certainly. Yeah, I mean, you've been a nanny. Well, I think they're going to be my nanny soon. Yeah, it's an incredibly rich and diverse world, just kind of stepping in. I mean, Barbara's been to the studio, and I think Riaz probably took you on a tour. But there's just so much going on. And then the food, I know. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. This was lovely.
Right.
Thank you, Alexander.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Alex,
Thank
the
you.
impression after your whole talk was you're just getting started. There's no end to this. You know, you just keep finding resonances. It's a very interesting sort of, now I'm sort of waiting for the next thing you're going to do already. It just seems like you've got such a lovely path ahead of you to continue exploring all of the themes you're doing. It's just beautiful.
Think pangolins and naked mole rats.
Oh,
Well, thank you for saying that. It's you know, I think in some ways I'm more interested in the process than the product.
I can tell.
interesting.
You know, and I think and in a way, this idea of things not being fixed is a part of that. You know, that they have a new life when they're with other people, and then so yeah, I do. You know, I think when I grow up.
Don't bother.
I think it's scheduled for.
Well, you're probably the only one among us, you and Shoma, who's not being culled by this disease.
Oh, right, right. Right.
You'll love that article.
You'll have a good chance to grow up, and I hope, and you've got a great start.
I wouldn't start on
Alexander?
that cult thing. No one, no matter what their age, is immune from devastating
No.
illness.
That's true.
And that's becoming increasingly clear.
And as I pointed out, I think just an aside in my talk, we are not being told about the sequelae of decades of illness that are coming out of this for those people who've survived it. It's not simply living or dying. There's a lot more to that. And unfortunately, it's pretty dreadful.
Well, the woman who got the double lung transplant last week, or was revealed last week, is one of the, you know, sort of early warning signs that the kind of damage that this does is more than something that the flu, more than something that you get over in a couple of weeks.
You know, it would be interesting to know the backstory. I mean, we know why she got a transplant, okay, but we don't know exactly how she got a transplant, where those lungs came from.
Yes.
Obviously, somebody who died from something else, and why she got them rather than any of the other people.
I was thinking all those questions.
Yes.
It was like Mickey Mantle getting a new whatever, and he was a devout alcoholic.
Alexander, I have a question. Next time you go to India, you know, in Bengal, I know you work on the Gujarat side. Every October, I think the AIC was supposed to go, or CCC was supposed to go to India for Durga Puja, where they have the iconic Durga Murtis. So you might like this. I mean, check with Anu. I think it'd be spectacular. The artisans who make the statues, every year they make it in a place called Kumurtuli. So they make it from hand. The process is lovely. When we were presenting, I was thinking instead of the normal because the people in Bengal are rather open to new ideas. So I don't think you'll be very easily offending them.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine if you took one of the Durga statues and
Oh,
instead
yeah.
of usual outfits,
Mm.
your paintings throughout it. I think because you have set 5 designs, and instead of the usual paraphernalia they put on the Durga Puja, if your paintings were all over it, it would be breathtaking.
And I'd love to do that. I have been in Varanasi for the puja, and they have ones. I don't think they're quite as baroque as the ones in Bengal, but they take it pretty seriously in Varanasi too.
That would look gorgeous.
Barbara Rubin, I took the group to Kumartoli on our first trip.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when I led the Sustaining Fellows in whatever year that was, we went. I insisted that we go to Calcutta.
Right.
Not everyone was as enthusiastic about it, but we went to Kumartoli while they were making the statues for Durga Puja. It was pretty fabulous. I've got great photos from there, which I can share with you, Alexander, if you want them.
Alexander, I have a question for you. First say, I'm a color junkie, and just the images and the colors are just amazing. But I'm fascinated by the process that you follow. Is there any tradition of doing something like this where you are not, as I understand it, and please correct me if I misinterpreted what you said, you are not merely saying an idea, you are giving very precise instructions of of drawing the actual outlines and images. I don't know how much detail you draw of the pattern within the images, but is there any tradition of doing this, or are you unique in this? It's just, I mean, forget being in 2 different continents, which is itself remarkable. Just the logistics of accomplishing this and the patience to have something take 4 years to complete, and that isn't the Sistine Chapel. You know, that was a big space.
Well, our shawls
it's amazing.
take that
Are there
long.
others who do this or have done this historically?
You know, it's certainly common for Indian miniature paintings to have a number of different hands involved. You know,
and did they give the detail that you gave then? The original artist, the sparking artist?
You know, I think what's changed in the tradition is that historically the master artist would actually be drawing the outline. Someone's had to come up with the figure to begin with, but once they're there, they're basically being traced ad infinitum, you know, and then possibly adapted. So Riaz is a good draftsman, but he wouldn't necessarily be very good at drawing a figure from observation, because he hasn't needed to. You know, I mean, basically when he learned from his father, or he then had an uncle who taught him, he would be looking at paintings and then basically doing the outline. So he's got a remarkably good hand in terms of skill, but I would say that his interpretation of three dimensions is not that great. In a sense, what's happened is that part of the Indian miniature tradition is now kind of dispensed with because people are constantly copying and copying. So what one of the artists in the studio will be taking the outline and then, I mean, just tracing it. It's quite an interesting process in itself, and we'll trace it. Another artist who's maybe kind of, learning will be mixing the colors and then blocking in the color, so it's like 4 or 5 colors. And I can show you images of the work kind of in gestation. Then another artist will come in and will start maybe doing the clothing, on top of the blocked color. So it starts building up. And then finally Riaz will come and he'll do the most important part of an Indian miniature painting is what they call the cut of the face, which is essentially the outline, because you can't fudge it. It has to be absolutely perfect. So the Karkhana, the workshop, will involve X number of artists, and then someone else is maybe doing the borders. It's very, very good.
I'm Paul Candid.
We'll basically just be doing the border. In terms of this, in terms of someone initiating the design, I don't know. I mean, there may well be other people who are doing it. I mean, I'm sure there are. You know, my good fortune is meeting someone who is astonishingly gifted and with whom I have a really very, very close relationship. So we've been able to.
But it's mutual, isn't it? Because I mean, he is really relishing this globalized, cosmopolitan creativity that you have. That is really something, a product of our culture. And it just seems like such a happy union of these cultures that a lot of people try to strike, but you've really struck it. I think, but it's mutual. It's not a. It
is, yeah. It is. I mean, I'm. You know, I stay with them in the house, and we, you know, I've invited Riaz. He's been to America twice. He's been to England once, and I for our 25th anniversary, I want to invite him to Paris because he's you know, he's very kind of romantic, and he'll either come with, he's got one actual wife, and then his brother, who's his kind of almost like a second wife, because they're absolutely inseparable. So he'll have a hard decision knowing which wife to bring with him. But yeah, it is. It's really a bond that it's quite kind of hard to describe, and I think. You know, Penelope, going back to your question, the movement, I suppose it's kind of fairly unusual, but I used to spend a lot of time out there, and we really kind of developed the language together, or I suppose I developed the language and he developed this ability to interpret it really beautifully. And there were times when I kind of really invited him to choose the colors, particularly the colors, and they came out kind of quite acidic. You know, he's still quite influenced by kind of the Bollywood aesthetic. So at this point now, I don't have to be quite as specific as I used to, because he's seeing things through my kind of eye. And you know, I've had to kind of, we've talked about symmetry and how things should not be exactly symmetrical, but then he might have put things right up against the edge. So in terms of, you know, it's really a kind of, we are each other's teachers, I would say. And I think when he does do his own work, I can see quite a bit of the influence of what we've done together. It's kind of seeping back into what he does, which is basically very traditional paintings. But
do you remember how you, I mean, I gather you didn't meet the man and said, oh, we need to collaborate. Do you remember your thought process of how you saw this man and what he did and how he could do, and said, you know, that's, and thought, I mean, I'm making this up, but that's a means of realizing things that I see. Do you remember doing that, or how did that work? Because that seems fascinating.
Well, you know, very much so. But I'd been working, one of the first collaborations was in, my mum used to go to Afghanistan, to Kabul, and I'd go with her every once in a while. I was very lucky to travel with her. And we went into an antique shop, and I picked up this metal figurine that was kind of verdigris, look, you know, had all this kind of green kind of gunk on it. And I said, oh, you know, what is this? And I was with a friend who was translating, who spoke Farsi. And the word was that it fell out of the sky. It was something that fell out of the sky, and apparently there's a word for that. And what it meant to me was that someone found it and didn't know what it was. And I said, oh, so it fell out of the sky, and how old is it? And he said, I think it's about 2,000 years old. And I said, really? You know, and it looked like it was 2,000 years old. But what it was it was a small figurine of Big Bird from the Sesame Street. And what had happened, I surmise is that a hippie family had, someone had left it there and gone back to America. Someone found it, thought, wow, I could turn this, it's plastic. I'm going to cast this. They cast it in bronze.
I love it.
They dip it in pea, and that's how that kind of oxidizes the metal. And it came out as an antique. So many, many years later, I was in Peshawar, and I brought my own objects, including the Cookie Monster, and a plastic Cookie Monster, and another big bird. And there's a forger, and interestingly, the forger was, I can't remember his surname, but it's in Islam. It's a family that is some kind of descendant of Muhammad. And I was told that someone with that name is unable to tell a lie. They're prohibited from lying. And I just love the fact that he was a forger. So I said, look, I want 5 of these models, and I want them, they need to be really old. 3 days later, I got these 2,000-year-old antiques. And what I knew was that he would then he would keep a copy and feed them into the market in Peshawar, and to sell them to other kind of unwitting tourists who are looking for Gandhara sculptures and so on. So this kind of started off my working relationship with people who had very, very particular skills. And because I'd be drawing all the time, so I went to a shoemaker, and I had a drawing of a shoe that split off into 2. And I said, can you make this? And for him, and he said, why not? It's this kind of, and sure enough, he started, they made the shoe last for it. And they started making it, and it came out beautifully. And it's kind of repulsive, actually, but it was beautifully made. So I kind of developed this idea of bringing whatever skills I have to someone who has very, very specialized skills, but no need to adapt them or apply them to anything else. And it really, really developed out of that, and then working with the sari embroiderers, I literally give them a drawing and said, can you turn this into an embroidered drawing? So it kind of built up. And with the miniature paintings, one of my mum's a friend that we've had for a long time is Francesca Galloway, who's an Indian miniature dealer. An astonishing, she has astonishing material. And I think she was the person who probably introduced me to miniature paintings. So in a way, the conceit I had when I started it was I was trying to imagine René Magritte in the atelier of Akbar, and just thinking, what would he do on the weekend, when he wasn't kind of, what would he kind of come up with? And that was really kind of the narrative I had for this project. So great. I started, and the very first drawings were actually, I actually had an Agnes Martin, a printout of an Agnes Martin painting, with nothing but the grids, with the thin lines. And then I had another image of a court scene of, the king and his courtiers in an Indian miniature paintings. And I said, let's draw these lines and let's just plonk the turbans onto the painting and get rid of all the figures. So it's basically demolishing 2 different traditions in one go. The kind of the purism of Agnes Martin, who would have been absolutely horrified. She would have sued me. Luckily she was in Taos and there weren't too many lawyers nearby, but she would have been horrified. And the artist, Riaz, couldn't understand why I would take the figure out of an Indian miniature painting. So that was really how it started, just trying to kind of bring together different elements of different visual languages. And then I got commissioned by Crabtree and Evelyn, as I said, to do these very small drawings. And that was when Riaz really knew that this could be a worthwhile kind of venture for him.
Because they paid well.
I paid well, yeah. I mean, that's always, I mean, they paid me. And I think, it's interesting that as much as Riaz and I adore one another, it is still essentially an economic relationship. So technically, in art parlance, I'm commissioning Riaz, because because he has no financial risk. He's actually the only painter in Jaipur who sells every single thing he does, because no one else, he wouldn't be able to sell it to anyone else. So I mean, I've got lots of work that haven't quite worked out. So it gave him a sense of security, and actually what had happened with his father had two wives, and when the father died and it was doing fairly well, the wives who had got on together very well until that point, suddenly they just kind of, and it was really to do with some of the in-laws were setting them against each other. And Riaz, they had to sell the shop, which was in a beautiful place and it was doing very well, but they had to sell it. And Riaz's fortunes really went down. So even though he was a very gifted painter, he would take his work to the market, and the dealers, I mean, he was fantastic, but the dealers would say, let me hold on to it and I'll let you know. And they would take a long time to pay, because there was no one else he could take the work to. So he'd get paid, and he knew he was very good, but there was nothing he could really do. And then when I came along, the family fortunes were going down and they were working in this very small space. And then suddenly I kind of made this proposition to him, and he started kind of doing a lot better financially. And then the dealers, they realized he wasn't coming back to see them anymore. And he said what would happen is that they would walk past the studio pretending to be on their way to something, and then kind of act as if they were, surprised to see him. And they'd go in, and he'd be working on, my images, and he'd hide them, and they would be kind of looking to see what he's doing. And then he'd pull out some of the traditional works. And he always made sure that none of them were ever finished, because then they would want it. And he said, well, come back. And he basically played the same trick on them that they had on. So over the years, he's developed a team. I mean, he still has work for the market, but he farms out his pieces to other artists, outside, and he might just do a little part of it, and then he can take them back to the dealers. So it's really been, so I do remember the way it kind of developed, but it's really been this kind of quite a dynamic journey, I suppose, between the two of us and the wider group.
So
wonderful
Alexander,
stories.
When you since you've been working in Jaipur all these years, did you ever hear any talk about the work that Francesco Clemente did there?
I think Francesco Clemente worked in the South. I don't think he was in Jaipur.
He lived in the South. He worked with Jaipur artists actually for one series that he did in the 80s called Francesco Clemente Pinchit, which is owned by the museum in Richmond, Virginia. I did my graduate work on Clemente because I went to the School of the Art Institute and they didn't offer a degree in Asian art. So he was my hook to be able to look at Indian miniatures, but talk about a Western artist.
Right.
And so that's how I met Banu. When I was doing my research, I went to India to try to see what the studios might have been like where he worked. But my ultimate thesis was that he painted them, that Francesco did it, because it didn't look like anything a miniature artist in a studio would do, who were doing mostly copies, as you said. And they had this sort of rough and ready look to them. And that I know he used probably younger apprentices in the studios, but I was wondering if you had heard any talk of what he did in Jaipur. I know that he worked in Jaipur.
Oh, he did. I didn't know that. I knew that he'd lived in the South.
It was in the 1980s. I mean, you were a baby then, so never mind.
Right. Well, it's interesting because there's an artist that I've kind of, whose name was never on any of his works, and he basically copied tantric paintings for the, for the market, and he developed a style that's actually quite similar to some of Clemente's work. So I wouldn't be surprised if they'd work together. And actually, now that you bring it up, Penelope, I think that is an example of an artist who has worked with Indian miniature painters. But I don't, in terms of who did what, I'm not sure. I think anything that's really, really highly skilled would
myself. Do you know the collection that he did, this group?
Yeah, the kind of erotic paintings.
No, they're not erotic.
Ah.
They're about 20 some odd paintings, and they're basically images from Indian mythology and the like.
Mm-hmm.
I know he's done erotic paintings as well, and he's looked at Kalighat paintings and
mm-hmm.
riffed off of those, and he's also some of the Odisha paintings
mm-hmm.
that he's done, but some of those were after I did my work. So I did the work on.
Hi, Richie.
Hi, Barb.
Hey, Alex, it was just wonderful.
In case anyone didn't know, this is Richie.
A wonderful head trip this afternoon. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Joseph.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Alan, are you on?
Yes.
Okay, announcement. I'm very excited. Next week, Alan is going to talk about his wonderful show and the history of it, Following the Box.
Oh, yay. That was good.
And Alan was marvelous to be the first person to present here and created the ambience, the feeling, the warmth, the joy that I think we've all experienced with one another. So now we will also see the professional Alan.
I was a happy sacrificial lamb.
Yes, you were. But boy, did you get the mood right. Thank you.
Right. Well, you're all amazing. I mean, it's really, the Salon is a real high point of the week. Especially with the world falling apart around us.
Right, and it is, I look forward to it. It's part of my web and has now become a very important part of my web. And that all of you who didn't know one another weekly get to go deeper and deeper on who we all are. So, who was I supposed to send the Forest Essential link to?
Betty.
Okay. Anything else I'm sending?
Sitting in the sun too much. I'm staying in California too long. I need Forest Essentials.
Shama?
That was fantastic. Thank you.
I'm going to send you all selection of Kumartoli paintings. And
Okay.
Alexander, I'll get the Holy Cow book to you.
Great.
Alexander, you said Magritte. So did you actually do Magritte? You replaced his bowler hat and the doves with Indian stuff? Have you
With
done
the
that?
tree.
No, it wasn't
The
so much.
artichoke.
It was really to do with the kind of the sensibility of kind of playing with, with narratives and playing with realism, I suppose. So it wasn't a direct. But I was always more interested in Magritte than in Dali, for example. I just found it kind of more subtle, and so it was more kind of a conceit really for the studio of kind of Magritte in Akbar's atelier.
Oh, it's a wonderful conceit.
I'm going to sign off. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hey,
It was
everybody.
wonderful.
Alexander.
Good to see everybody.
Back to the real world.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye.